The Galactic Council chamber was massive beyond human comprehension. Its walls stretched upward into darkness, carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed older than time itself. 12 enormous thrones sat in a perfect circle, each one occupied by a being so alien that looking at them too long made your head hurt. Some were made of pure energy that crackled and hummed. Others had crystalline bodies that refracted light in impossible ways. A few were so strange they seemed to exist partially in other dimensions, flickering in and out of normal space. At the center of this ancient chamber stood one very human man, looking incredibly small and out of place. Ambassador Jake Harrison had been standing there for 3 hours now. His legs ached. His throat was dry. The council didn't offer chairs to those being judged, and they certainly didn't take breaks for something as primitive as biological needs. These beings had evolved past such inconveniences millions of years ago. Jake represented Earth's petition to join the Galactic Council. It was humanity's 5th attempt in 50 years, and based on how things were going, it would probably be their last. The elder races made no secret of their contempt. To them, humans were babies playing with fire, a species that had barely crawled out of their solar system and already thought they deserved a seat at the table with civilizations that had been crossing galaxies before Earth had even formed. The Hierophant spoke again, its voice like wind chimes made of bones. It didn't have a mouth, exactly, but somehow the words appeared directly in Jake's mind, cold and sharp. The being was presenting evidence, as it had been for hours. Holographic displays materialized in the air showing humanity's greatest failures. The world wars. Nuclear weapons. Environmental collapse. The Mars colony disaster. The first contact incident where a trigger-happy Earth defense fleet nearly started an interstellar war over a misunderstanding. Each failure was dissected with clinical precision. The Hierophant's tone never changed, never showed anger or disappointment, just cold factual observation. Humanity was illogical. Humanity was violent. Humanity made decisions based on emotion rather than optimal outcomes. Humanity had a life expectancy barely reaching 100 years, far too short to develop the wisdom necessary for galactic governance. Jake had prepared for all of this. He'd spent 2 years studying council protocols, learning their languages, memoizing diplomatic responses to every possible accusation. He answered each point methodically, professionally. Yes, humanity had made mistakes. Yes, they were young and still learning. But they had also shown remarkable adaptability, creativity, and determination. They had potential. The council members remained unmoved. Their crystalline faces showed nothing. Their energy forms pulsed with the same steady rhythm. One of them, a being that looked like living liquid metal, actually seemed to fall asleep. Then the Hierophant changed tactics. The holographic display shifted, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was footage from the Frontier Station 7 attack. Jake recognized it immediately. He tried to have this recording sealed, classified, buried so deep nobody would ever see it again. But of course the council had found it. They had technology that could pull data from anywhere in the galaxy. The display showed the station's residential sector. Families going about their daily lives. Children playing in the corridor. And then the alarms, the explosions, the chaos as unknown hostiles breached the hull. Jake watched people he knew running, screaming, dying. The council was showing this to demonstrate humanity's inability to protect their own colonies, their weakness in the face of real threats. But then the recording focused on one specific residential unit. Jake's hands clenched into fists. His jaw tightened. The Hierophant knew exactly what it was doing. There was Lisa, Jake's wife, holding their daughter. 8-year-old Amy clutching her stuffed rabbit, the one she'd had since she was 3. Lisa was trying to reach the evacuation pods, but the corridors were blocked by debris. The recording had audio. Jake could hear Amy crying, asking why this was happening. Lisa was telling her everything would be okay, they just needed to stay calm, help was coming. Help didn't come in time. The recording showed the hull breach in their section. The explosive decompression. It lasted only seconds, but Jake saw every detail. He'd watched this recording 1,000 times in the years since the attack, torturing himself with what ifs and should-haves. The Hierophant's voice cut through his thoughts. This, it said, was proof of humanity's fundamental weakness. They built stations that couldn't withstand basic attacks. They put families in danger through poor planning. They allowed emotion to cloud judgment, placing residential sectors in vulnerable positions because it made people happy rather than positioning them where they'd be most secure. Jake had prepared responses for everything. He had diplomatic answers ready for any accusation. But watching his wife and daughter die again, projected 50 feet tall for this council of ancient beings to dissect and judge. Something inside him broke. The scream that tore from his throat wasn't planned. It wasn't strategic. It was pure grief, pure rage, pure human pain compressed into sound. 3 years of holding himself together, of being professional, of representing his entire species with dignity and control, all of it shattered in that one moment. The sound should have been absorbed by the chamber's acoustic dampening systems. The council had technology specifically designed to prevent such emotional outbursts from disrupting proceedings. But the scream didn't stop. It grew louder, resonating, echoing off the ancient walls in ways that shouldn't have been physically possible. The symbols carved into the stone began to glow with soft blue light, something they hadn't done in recorded history. The floor beneath Jake's feet started to crack. The cracks in the floor spread outward from where Jake stood, moving like lightning across the ancient stone. The sound was deafening, like 1,000 mirrors shattering at once. The council members, beings who had existed for millions of years and witnessed the birth and death of countless stars, suddenly looked afraid. One of the energy beings tried to activate its personal shield. Nothing happened. The crystalline representatives attempted to engage their defense protocols. The technology simply refused to respond. Even the emergency containment fields, designed to handle everything from antimatter explosions to dimensional tears, failed to initialize. The glowing symbols on the walls grew brighter, shifting from soft blue to brilliant white. They weren't just carved into the stone, Jake realized. They were moving, flowing like liquid across the surface, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. His scream had finally died in his throat, but the chamber itself seemed to have taken up the sound, vibrating with a frequency that made his bones ache. The Hierophant, who moments ago had been calmly dissecting humanity's failures, now drifted backward from its throne. Its crystalline body was fracturing, small pieces breaking off and floating away. It wasn't injured exactly, but whatever force was filling the chamber was disrupting its very structure. Then the walls began to change. The solid black stone, which had stood unchanged for 47,000 years according to council records, started to ripple. Not like it was melting or breaking down, but like something was separating from it. Like there had always been two layers, and now they were peeling apart. A darkness emerged. But it wasn't the simple absence of light. This was darkness that had weight and presence, darkness that existed as its own thing rather than just the shadow of something else. It pulled away from the walls and sheets, gathering at the center of the chamber, forming a shape. The shape was roughly human in proportion, which was somehow more disturbing than if it had been completely alien. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But the details were all wrong. The limbs were too long, the joints bent at angles that didn't quite match human anatomy. And the entire figure seemed to absorb light, creating a void in space that Jake's eyes couldn't quite focus on. 2 eyes opened in what passed for a face. They were the color of dying stars, that deep red shifting to orange that astronomers saw when a sun began its final collapse. Those eyes looked at Jake, then swept across the council chamber, taking in the fleeing alien representatives, the shattered floor, the glowing walls. When it spoke, Jake didn't hear the words with his ears. They appeared directly in his mind, but unlike the Hierophant's cold mental transmissions, these words carried weight and emotion, ancient and tired and somehow sad. The Keeper Protocol is satisfied, the entity said. The seal recognizes its heir. The remaining council members were in full panic now. The liquid metal being had abandoned its throne entirely, flowing across the floor toward the exit. The energy creatures were trying to phase into other dimensions, but something about the chamber was preventing it. One of the crystalline representatives was frantically accessing data files, pulling up information that scrolled past too fast for Jake to read. The entity ignored them all. It moved toward Jake with steps that didn't quite touch the ground, gliding across the broken floor. Jake wanted to run, wanted to move, wanted to do anything except stand there frozen, but his body refused to respond. His legs felt like they'd been filled with concrete. A hand of living shadow reached out and touched his shoulder. The moment contact was made, Jake's entire world exploded into sensation and information. Images flooded his mind. A galaxy that looked nothing like the current one, filled with civilizations he'd never heard of, ships that moved through space using principles human scientists hadn't even theorized yet. And everywhere, beings that looked like this shadow creature, moving between worlds, settling disputes, maintaining order. But they weren't rulers. They were guardians. Jake could feel the difference even though he didn't fully understand it. They didn't command or control. They witnessed, they mediated, they carried the emotional weight of every decision made. The visions shifted. He saw the keepers growing weary, saw them attempting to pass their responsibilities to other races. Saw those races refuse, or accept but then transform the role into something else. Cold logic replaced empathy. Calculation replaced compassion. Efficiency replaced understanding. More images. The keepers gathering, making a decision. Building this chamber around themselves, not as a prison but as a waiting place. Creating the seal with specific conditions. They needed successors who could feel deeply but still function, who could carry the weight of others' pain without being crushed by it, who could make difficult choices while never forgetting the cost. They needed what they had been. And every advanced race in the galaxy had evolved past that point, had deliberately suppressed the very traits the keepers valued most. The information kept coming, faster now, almost too much to process. Mathematical formulas that described emotional resonance. Historical records spanning hundreds of thousands of years. The true purpose of the council chamber, the real meaning behind the symbols on the walls, the nature of the seal itself. And finally, the protocol. The ancient test the keepers had left behind. It required a sound of pure emotional truth, generated by a being capable of both deep feeling and rational thought. Not a scream of rage or fear, which were simple and common. But grief mixed with love, loss mixed with memory, pain that came from caring deeply about something beyond yourself. Billions of beings had stood in this chamber over the millennia. The seal had measured them all and found them wanting. Too logical, too controlled, too evolved past genuine emotion. Until now. The entity pulled its hand back, and Jake gasped as the flood of information stopped. His knees buckled and he caught himself on the cracked floor, breathing hard, his mind reeling from everything he'd just experienced. "I am the last keeper," the shadow being said, and now Jake understood what that meant. This creature was ancient beyond measure, had existed before Earth's sun had finished forming, had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. My kind sealed themselves away when the galaxy no longer needed what we offered. But we left the protocol. We left the test. We waited for one worthy of inheriting what we built. Jake looked up at the entity, his vision still swimming with after-images of the visions he'd seen. "I'm not worthy of anything," he managed to say. "I'm just a man who couldn't save his family." The keeper's dying star eyes regarded him with something that might have been kindness. "That is precisely why you are worthy. You feel the weight of loss. You carry grief not because you must, but because you loved deeply enough that losing them changed you forever. The council races have forgotten how to feel such things. They call it evolution. We call it death." Around them, the chamber continued to transform. The walls had stopped glowing but now showed different symbols, ones that hadn't been visible before. The broken floor was rearranging itself into new patterns. And through the sealed doorways, Jake could hear alarms blaring throughout the entire station. The ancient seal was broken. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The keeper's hand remained on Jake's shoulder, and new visions began to flow. Not the overwhelming flood from before, but a steady stream of images and understanding that his mind could actually process. He saw the galaxy as it existed 200,000 years ago. The stars were in slightly different positions, constellations that would be unrecognizable to modern astronomers. But what struck Jake most wasn't the astronomy. It was the life, the sheer abundance of it. Thousands of civilizations at varying stages of development, trading and communicating and occasionally conflicting with each other. And moving between them all, the keepers. Jake watched them work, and it was nothing like what the current Galactic Council did. They didn't make laws or enforce regulations. Instead, they listened. When two species had a dispute over mining rights on an asteroid, a keeper didn't calculate the optimal resource distribution. They sat with both sides, felt their needs and fears and hopes, understood what the resources truly meant to each civilization beyond simple economic value. One vision showed a keeper mediating between two worlds on the brink of war. The being didn't present logical arguments or threaten sanctions. It simply helped each side understand what the other was feeling. Helped them see past the anger and fear to the underlying needs. Helped them remember that the other side was made up of living beings with families and dreams, not just obstacles to overcome. The wars that were prevented, Jake realized, weren't stopped through force or diplomacy as he understood it. They were stopped because the keepers made empathy possible across vast differences in biology and culture. But the visions shifted, and Jake felt a growing sadness that he understood wasn't entirely his own. The keeper was sharing its memories, and those memories carried emotion. He saw the keepers growing exhausted. Not physically, these beings existed beyond such limitations. But emotionally drained in ways that cut deeper than any physical fatigue. Every conflict they mediated, they felt both sides completely. Every tragedy they witnessed, they carried the grief of all involved. Every difficult decision, they bore the full weight of consequences. Imagine feeling the pain of losing a child, Jake thought. Now imagine feeling that pain for 1,000 families simultaneously. Now imagine doing that for 1,000,000 years. The keepers tried to create successors. They approached the most advanced civilizations, the ones that seemed capable of understanding what guardianship truly meant. They offered to teach, to train, to pass on their methods and philosophy. Some races accepted eagerly. Jake saw them begin the training, learning to open themselves to others' emotions, to carry the weight of empathy. But within a few generations, those same races started to change the role. They began creating rules to make empathy unnecessary. They developed logical frameworks to avoid having to feel what others felt. They called it efficiency, called it advancement, called it evolution. Why feel someone's pain, one crystalline being argued in a vision, when we can simply calculate the optimal solution and implement it? The keeper showing Jake these memories added quietly in his mind, they did not understand that the feeling was the point. That carrying the weight was what made the decisions meaningful. Other races refused the offer entirely. They looked at what the keepers did, saw the emotional toll it took, and decided they wanted no part of it. These civilizations began deliberately engineering themselves to feel less, to think more purely in terms of logic and optimal outcomes. They extended their lifespans by reducing stress, and reduced stress by reducing emotional capacity. Jake watched in the visions as, one by one, every advanced civilization in the galaxy chose the same path. Emotions became seen as primitive, a holdover from evolutionary stages best left behind. The ability to feel deep grief or joy or love became something to overcome, not something to value. The keepers gathered for a final meeting. Jake could feel their profound loneliness, these beings who had dedicated themselves to understanding others, now finding themselves alone in a galaxy that had decided understanding didn't matter anymore. They made their decision. They would seal themselves away, but not give up entirely. They would create a protocol, a test embedded in the very structure of this chamber. They would wait, for as long as it took, for a species to emerge that had both the capacity for deep feeling and the rational capability to function in a technological civilization. Most species developed one or the other. Primitive civilizations felt deeply but lacked the reasoning to handle galactic-scale responsibilities. Advanced civilizations had the reasoning but had systematically eliminated the depth of feeling. The keepers needed both. And they were willing to wait forever to find it. The vision shifted to show the creation of the chamber itself. The keepers poured their essence into the walls, creating the seal. The symbols weren't just decorations, they were pieces of the keepers themselves, waiting and watching and measuring every being who entered. 47,000 years of Galactic Council meetings. Hundreds of thousands of beings standing in this chamber. The seal measured them all. It listened to their words, felt their emotions, analyzed their capacity for genuine feeling. Not one had come close to breaking it. Until today. The keeper released Jake's shoulder, and the vision stopped. Jake stumbled backward, his mind reeling from everything he'd seen. The chamber around him looked different now. He could see the faint glow in the symbols, could feel the ancient presence embedded in the stone. You still don't understand why it had to be humanity, do you? The keeper asked, and there was something almost gentle in its voice. Jake shook his head. We're violent. We're short-lived. We make terrible decisions based on emotion all the time. How is that what you were waiting for? Because you feel, the keeper said simply. Your species has developed faster than light travel, quantum computers, genetic engineering, all the markers of an advanced civilization. But you did not sacrifice your emotional capacity to get there. You still write poetry. You still create art that serves no practical purpose except to make you feel something. You still grieve your dead instead of simply replacing them. You still love so deeply that losing someone can break you. The shadow being gestured around at the empty thrones, the council members who had fled or were cowering in corners. These races chose differently. They decided that to become advanced meant becoming cold. They look at your tears and see weakness. Your anger and see primitiveness. Your love and see inefficiency. We look at those things and see the only hope this galaxy has left. Jake wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways humanity was flawed, all the mistakes they'd made. But the keeper continued, its dying star eyes holding his gaze. Your scream broke the seal not because it was loud, but because it was real. Pure grief for those you loved, carried for 3 years without diminishing. You stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and let them see your pain, not as manipulation or strategy, but because the pain was too great to contain anymore. That authenticity, that depth of feeling, that refusal to bury your emotions in the name of appearing advanced, that is what we waited 200,000 years to find. The Keeper moved closer, and Jake could see other shapes moving within its shadow body, hints of the countless beings it had been, the millions of memories it carried. The galaxy is dying, Jake Harrison. Not in fire or collapse, but in ice. It is freezing into perfect, efficient, emotionless order. The Council does not prevent suffering, it simply ignores anything that cannot be solved through calculation. Entire civilizations cry for help and are deemed inefficient to save. Species go extinct because preserving them does not fit optimal resource allocation models. They have achieved peace by eliminating anyone who cares enough to fight for anything. Jake thought about that. About a galaxy where nothing mattered enough to be worth conflict, where every decision was made by cold calculation, where love and grief and passion were seen as flaws to overcome. It was peaceful. It was stable. It was utterly dead inside. So what happens now? He asked. The Keeper's expression, if it could be called that, seemed almost sad. Now you inherit what we built. Now humanity becomes what this galaxy needs, whether it wants it or not. The Keeper raised one shadowy hand, and the chamber's massive doors, which had sealed shut during the chaos, slowly began to open. The sound of grinding stone echoed through the space. The council members who had fled stopped in their tracks. Those who had been trying to force the doors open from the outside stumbled forward as the barriers disappeared. Jake could see security forces gathering beyond the doorway, armed with weapons he didn't recognize. Communication systems throughout the station were lighting up, emergency protocols activating. But none of it mattered. The Keeper's presence filled the chamber with a weight that made technology feel insignificant. The entity turned to face the council members, and Jake felt a surge of power flow through the room. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it carried absolute authority. The fleeing representatives stopped. Some turned back reluctantly. Others were physically unable to continue moving, held in place by forces they couldn't see or understand. The trial will continue, the Keeper announced, its voice resonating in every mind present. But the accused has changed. The Hierophant, still fractured but reforming itself slowly, drifted back toward its throne. Its mental voice was different now, lacking the cold confidence it had carried before. This is irregular. The protocols do not allow for such changes. Your protocols, the Keeper said quietly, were built in a chamber you did not create, using rules you do not understand, enforcing judgments you have no authority to make. You have been squatters in a courtroom, playing at justice while the true purpose of this place slept beneath your feet. Jake found his voice, though it felt strange to speak after everything that had happened. He looked at the gathered council members, these ancient beings who had seemed so powerful just hours ago, and realized they looked smaller now. Diminished. When was the last time any of you created something beautiful? He asked. The question came out softer than he'd intended, but it carried in the transformed chamber. Not functional. Not efficient. Just beautiful for its own sake. Silence. Several council members exchanged glances, or whatever passed for glances among beings without traditional faces. When did you last hold a ceremony for the dead that wasn't about efficient resource redistribution? Jake continued, feeling more confident. When did you last make a decision because it was kind instead of optimal? One of the energy beings pulsed with something that might have been confusion. These questions are irrelevant to galactic governance. Beauty is subjective and therefore cannot be standardized. Grief is a biological response to loss that serves no productive function. Kindness that conflicts with optimal outcomes produces net negative utility. Listen to yourself, Jake said, and he felt the Keeper's approval like warmth at his back. You're talking about living beings like they're equations to solve. Do you even remember what it feels like to lose someone? Not to calculate the economic impact of their absence, but to actually miss them. The crystalline representatives remained silent. Jake pressed forward. The Keeper showed me your histories. You weren't always like this. Your species used to write poetry. The kind that took decades to compose because every word had to carry perfect emotional weight. You used to have art galleries that beings would travel across the galaxy to visit. He turned to another representative, a being that looked like living liquid contained in an invisible force field. Your people had mourning rituals that lasted years. When someone died, the entire community would share the grief, carry it together, honor what that person meant. And you, Jake looked at the energy being, your civilization used to celebrate love. Actual love, not genetic compatibility assessments. You had bonding ceremonies that connected individuals so deeply that when one died, the other would feel the loss for the rest of their existence. The keeper waved its hand, and the walls of the chamber came alive with images. Not the cold holographic displays the council used, but something warmer, more real. Ancient recordings pulled from databases so old most of the council had forgotten they existed. The walls showed the hierophant species as they once were, millions of years ago. They were smaller then, less crystalline, more organic. And they were dancing. Creating intricate patterns in the air, movements that served no survival purpose, no reproductive function, no logical goal. They were dancing because it was beautiful, because it made them feel something, because the joy of movement was its own reward. The images shifted. The liquid metal species holding ceremonies around their dead, their bodies rippling with shared grief, supporting each other through loss not because it was efficient but because they cared about each other. The energy beings, younger and less stable in form, joining together in pairs and groups, creating bonds that transcended simple biology, choosing to tie their existence to others not for advantage but for love. Every council species had a similar history. Every one of them had once valued emotion, beauty, connection. And every one of them had deliberately chosen to abandon it. We evolved past such primitiveness, the hierophant said, but its voice lacked conviction. We extended our lifespans by reducing unnecessary stress. We eliminated conflicts by removing the emotional attachments that caused them. We advanced. You didn't advance, Jake said, and he felt tears on his face, though he wasn't sure if they were for his own loss or for these ancient beings who had lost something they didn't even recognize as valuable anymore. You retreated. You looked at the hard parts of existence, the painful parts, and decided the solution was to stop feeling anything at all. The keeper spoke then, its voice carrying sorrow that seemed to age the very air in the chamber. I have watched you for 47,000 years. I have observed your council making decisions that you call wise. Let me share what I have seen. New images appeared on the walls. A small civilization, barely achieving spaceflight, sending out a distress call. Their sun was dying prematurely, and they needed help relocating their population. The council received the call, ran calculations, and determined that the resources required to save them exceeded the projected contribution they would make to galactic civilization. The call was denied. Jake watched that civilization die. Billions of beings who would never know that help had been available, that they'd been measured and found wanting, that cold calculation had sealed their fate. Another image. A disease spreading through a remote sector, something curable with medicine the council had stockpiled. But the affected worlds had nothing to trade, no resources worth the cost of intervention. The calculation showed a negative return on investment. The medicine stayed in storage while populations died. How many times, the keeper asked. How many civilizations have cried out for help that you had the power to give? How many preventable deaths have you allowed because saving those lives did not fit your optimization models? The council members had no answer. Some looked away from the images. Others seemed incapable of processing what they were seeing as a moral failure rather than a simple resource allocation decision. You have not created peace, Jake said, understanding now what the keeper had been trying to show him. You've created apathy on a galactic scale. Nothing matters enough to fight for because you've forgotten how to value anything beyond pure logic. You let people die not because you're evil, but because you've eliminated the capacity to care about suffering that doesn't affect you directly. One of the younger council members, a being Jake didn't recognize from any of the historical images, spoke up hesitantly. What would you have us do? Feel every death, carry every tragedy? We would be paralyzed by the weight of it. Yes, the keeper said simply. You would feel the weight. That is the price of guardianship. That is what we carried for millions of years. That is what we hoped to pass on. But we could not find anyone willing to bear it. Until now. The keeper turned to Jake, and he felt the full weight of what was being offered. The power to change things, to force the galaxy to remember what it meant to feel. But also the burden of carrying all that emotion, all that pain, all that responsibility. I'm just one person, Jake said quietly. Humanity is just one species. We can't fix an entire galaxy. No, the keeper agreed. But you can remind it what it has lost. You can be the conscience they have forgotten they need. The chamber continued to transform around them. The ancient stone wasn't just changing appearance anymore, it was fundamentally restructuring itself. The cold, intimidating throne room that had been designed to make petitioners feel small and judged was becoming something else entirely. The ceiling, which had stretched into darkness, now showed something that looked almost like a sky, with points of light that might have been stars or might have been something else entirely. Jake watched as the 12 enormous thrones began to shift and lower, becoming less like seats of absolute authority and more like places where equals might gather. The floor repaired itself, the cracked ceiling, but the new pattern that emerged was different from before. Instead of geometric precision, it showed flowing designs that reminded Jake of rivers, of tree branches, of the organic chaos that characterized life itself. "I'm not going to destroy your council," Jake said, looking at the assembled representatives. Some of them visibly relaxed at this, their energy fields stabilizing, their crystalline structures reforming more solidly. "That would just be humanity imposing our will through force, and we'd be repeating the same mistakes that have been made for millions of years." The Hierophant's voice entered his mind, cautious now. "Then what do you propose?" Jake glanced at the Keeper, who remained silent, watching. This decision had to be his, he realized. Humanity's. The Keeper wouldn't interfere, wouldn't guide his hand. That was the whole point. The galaxy needed guardians who could feel and choose, not follow instructions. "A choice," Jake said finally. "Every species represented here gets to choose their own path forward. You can stay exactly as you are, logical and efficient and emotionally neutral. Nobody's going to force you to change. But you won't hold unchallenged authority anymore. You won't get to make life and death decisions for other civilizations based purely on whether they fit your optimization models." One of the liquid metal beings rippled with what might have been anger. "And who challenges us? Humanity? You have been in space for barely 3 centuries. You have one planet, a handful of colonies, technology that is primitive by our standards." "You're right," Jake admitted. "We're young. We're inexperienced. We make mistakes constantly. But we have something you've forgotten, and that's worth more than you realize." He felt the Keeper's power flowing through him, not controlling but supporting, and he understood what needed to happen next. Jake raised his hand, mimicking the gesture he'd seen the Keeper make, and the chamber walls responded. The ancient symbols flared to life, brighter than before, and new images began to appear. These weren't recordings from the past. They were possibilities, futures that could exist. Jake saw libraries, vast and beautiful, filled with knowledge from across the galaxy. But the doors to these libraries wouldn't open for just anyone. They required something specific to access. In one vision, a being approached a sealed archive. It contained medical knowledge that could cure a plague affecting their world. But the door remained locked until the being wept, genuinely wept, for those who were suffering. The tears weren't payment or a test to pass. They were proof of connection, proof that the knowledge would be used by someone who understood its importance beyond mere data. Another image showed technology, machines that could terraform dead worlds or generate unlimited clean energy. But these devices only activated in the presence of genuine emotion. Laughter, joy, hope, even righteous anger. They were designed to serve those who still felt deeply, who would use the power not just efficiently but compassionately. "The Keeper is leaving," Jake explained, and he could feel the truth of it. The shadow being was already becoming less solid, its time finally, truly ending. But it's leaving behind a legacy. Knowledge and technology beyond anything the current galaxy has access to. The original Keeper civilization's achievements, sealed away for 200,000 years. The council members leaned forward, interested despite themselves. Access to technology that predated their own civilizations, knowledge from beings who had mastered both science and empathy. "But there's a condition," Jake continued. "This knowledge can't be accessed through logic alone. The archives, the technology, the libraries, they all require emotional capacity to unlock. You want the cure for aging? You need to first demonstrate that you value life enough to grieve death. You want weapons that can defend against any threat? You need to prove you understand fear and would only use them to protect, not to conquer. This is manipulation," one of the energy beings protested. "Forcing us to feel things in order to access what should be freely available knowledge." "No," the Keeper said, its voice growing fainter as it continued to fade. "It is ensuring that advancement comes with wisdom. That power is wielded by those who understand its weight. You have spent millions of years developing technology while abandoning empathy. Now you must develop both together, or not at all." Jake watched the council members process this. He could see the calculation happening in their ancient minds, weighing the value of the promised knowledge against the cost of reclaiming their emotional capacity. "Some of you will reject this," he said. "You'll decide that your current path is correct, that emotions are primitive, that logic is supreme. That's fine. You can continue as you are. But you won't get to make decisions for others anymore. Humanity will be here, and we'll be watching. When a civilization calls for help, we'll feel their desperation. When a species faces extinction, we'll carry their fear. And we'll do everything in our power to help, even when it's not efficient, even when the calculation doesn't balance. A younger council member, one who had been silent throughout the entire proceeding, spoke up. Its voice was different from the others, carrying something that sounded almost like curiosity. How do we begin? If we wanted to try to reclaim what our ancestors abandoned, where would we start? The keeper smiled, or at least the shadow where its face should be shifted in a way that suggested pleasure. The same way all beings begin. By allowing yourself to feel one small thing. Fear, joy, sadness, wonder. Start with just one emotion, genuinely experienced, and see where it leads. Jake had an idea. He pulled out his personal datapad, the one he'd brought with him to the council chamber, and accessed his private files. His hands shook slightly as he navigated to a specific folder, one he hadn't opened in months because it hurt too much. "This is my daughter," he said, projecting an image onto the chamber wall. Amy, laughing in the sunlight on Earth, her hair catching the breeze, holding up a drawing she'd made of their family. She loved to draw. Wasn't very good at it, honestly. The proportions were always wrong, and she used colors that didn't make any sense. But she made art because it made her happy. Because creating something, anything, felt good. He showed more images. Lisa teaching Amy to ride a bike. Family dinners where half the food got burned because they were all laughing too hard to pay attention to the cooking. Holidays and birthdays and ordinary days that were precious just because they were spent together. "They died in the Frontier Station 7 attack," Jake said, and his voice cracked, but he kept going. "And it destroyed me. Some days I can barely function because the grief is so heavy. But I wouldn't give up those memories, wouldn't erase the pain, because the pain exists because the love was real. The grief is the price of having something worth losing." The chamber was absolutely silent. The council members watched the images of this human family, so brief and fragile compared to their million-year existences, and for the first time in millennia, some of them felt something stir. One of the crystalline beings, smaller than the Hierophant, moved closer to the projection. The small one. "She looks happy. I remember happiness. My species, we used to." It trailed off, struggling with concepts it hadn't accessed in so long they felt foreign. "We used to create similar images," it finally continued. "Not to document or record data, but to capture moments we wanted to remember. Moments that mattered not because they were significant but because they felt good." The keeper was almost completely transparent now, barely visible even as a shadow. Its final words echoed through the chamber. "The seal is broken. The silence is shattered. What comes next is up to all of you. But remember this, a galaxy that cannot feel is a galaxy that cannot truly live. Choose wisely." And then it was gone, faded completely, its presence absorbed into the transformed chamber itself. But Jake could still feel it somehow, woven into the very structure of the place, waiting and watching. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change. Some council members rejected everything, maintaining their cold logical approach, insisting that emotions were weakness. But others, particularly the younger ones who had seen their own species forgotten past, began to experiment. The first art exhibition in the transformed chamber happened 3 weeks after the seal broke. A crystalline being, hands trembling with nervousness it hadn't felt in centuries, presented a sculpture. It wasn't functional, wasn't designed to do anything except be looked at. And it was beautiful. When other beings gathered to view it, some of them experienced something they couldn't quite name. It moved them. Made them feel. One began to cry, liquid streaming from optical senses that had never produced tears before. Music followed. A liquid metal species member discovered ancient instruments in their historical archives and learned to play them. The sounds weren't optimized or mathematically perfect. They were emotional, raw, real. Jake stood in the chamber, now serving not as Earth's ambassador but as something else. Witness, the other humans called him. The one who reminded the galaxy what it meant to feel. He thought about Lisa and Amy every day. The grief hadn't lessened, probably never would. But now it served a purpose. His pain, his love, his very human heart was helping an entire galaxy remember its own. A young alien approached him, one of the energy beings, its form flickering uncertainly. "Ambassador Jake? I felt something today. When I saw the sculpture. I do not know what to call it." Jake smiled. "That's okay. You don't need to name it right away. Just let yourself feel it. That's how you begin." The galaxy was waking up. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. And Jake Harrison, a man who had lost everything, found himself at the center of something beautiful. Teaching ancient civilizations how to be alive again. One feeling at a time.